Welcome to my channel Bookish English. Stop for a second and ask yourself honestly, how long have you been waiting to speak English? Days, months, or even years? And what if the reason you are still not speaking is not because English is hard, but because you are waiting for the wrong moment? In this video, I will show you my real journey, from fear to confidence, the mistakes I made, and the simple habit that changed everything. So stay with me, because by the end, you will know exactly how to start speaking today. Chapter 1: The Silent Beginning. There was a time in my life when English was everywhere around me, but it still felt very far away from me, like a world I could see but could never enter. Fertile. I remember sitting in my room, holding my school books, looking at the English words on the page, and feeling something heavy inside my chest. Because I could recognize some words, I could guess a few meanings, but when it came to speaking, my mind became completely silent, as if all the words disappeared the moment I needed them the most. I was not alone in this feeling, and maybe as you are listening to me right now, you also remember moments like this in your own life. Moments when you wanted to say something simple in English, but your voice stopped, your confidence dropped, and your thoughts became confused. In school, I would sit quietly while others tried to speak, and even when they made mistakes, I would still stay silent, because in my mind, I believed that speaking meant being perfect, and if I could not be perfect, then it was better not to speak at all. I used to listen carefully when the teacher spoke in English, trying to understand every word, and sometimes I did understand, but understanding was not the same as speaking, and that gap between knowing and speaking felt so big that it scared me. I remember one moment very clearly, when the teacher asked a simple question, and I knew the answer in my mind. I could even say it in my own language easily. But when I tried to say it in English, my mouth did not move, my heart started beating faster, and I just stayed quiet while someone else answered. That moment stayed with me for a long time, because it made me feel like English was not for me. Outside the classroom, the feeling was the same. I would watch movies in English, listen to people speaking, and sometimes I could understand the general idea, but I still felt like an outsider, like someone watching from behind a glass wall. I wanted to be part of that world. I wanted to speak freely, to express my thoughts, to feel confident, but instead, I felt shy, confused, and sometimes even embarrassed when someone spoke English in front of me. I would look down, avoid eye contact, and hope that no one would ask me to say anything, because deep inside, I was afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being judged, and afraid of sounding wrong. But the truth is, the more I stayed silent, the stronger that fear became. Silence felt safe in the moment, but it slowly built a wall inside me, a wall that separated me from the language I wanted to learn. Days passed, then weeks, then months, and even though I was surrounded by English, I was not really living it. I was only watching it, observing it, but never using it. And the more I waited, the more difficult it felt to start. It was like standing at the edge of a swimming pool, wanting to jump in, but being too afraid of the cold water, so you just stand there, thinking, waiting, and doing nothing. At some point, I started asking myself a question that changed everything, even though at that time I did not realize how important it was. I asked myself, why is English so hard for me, when children can learn it so easily? I had seen children speak without fear, without thinking too much, without worrying about mistakes, and I wondered what was different between them and me. This question stayed in my mind, and it did not let me rest, because the more I thought about it, the more I felt that something was not right with the way I was trying to learn. I realized that I was always trying to understand everything before speaking. I was always waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel confident, waiting to feel perfect. But that moment never came. I was learning English like a subject, not like a language. And maybe that was the real problem. I was focusing on rules, on grammar, on correct answers, but I was not focusing on using the language in real life. I was treating English like a test, not like a tool, and that made everything feel heavy, slow, and difficult. And then something very small but very important started to happen inside me. It was not a big change, it was not a sudden transformation, but it was a quiet realization, a small voice that said maybe the problem is not English, maybe the problem is how I am learning it. That thought stayed with me, and it slowly started to grow. I began to question everything I had believed before. Do I really need to be perfect to speak? Do I really need to know everything before I start? Or is there another way, a simpler way, a more natural way to learn? At that moment, I did not have all the answers, but I had something more important. I had curiosity. And sometimes, curiosity is the beginning of change. Because once you start questioning your old way, you open the door to a new way. I did not know what that new way would look like. I did not know how I would start. But I knew one thing very clearly. I could not stay silent forever. Something inside me was ready to change, ready to try, ready to take even the smallest step forward. And that small feeling, that quiet decision, was the beginning of everything that came next. Chapter 2. The Pain of Waiting. I believed for a long time that one day I would feel ready, and on that day I would finally start speaking English without fear, without hesitation, and without mistakes. I told myself that I just needed a little more time, a little more grammar, a few more words, and then everything would become easy. It sounded reasonable in my mind, and maybe you have also said these same words to yourself, because they feel safe, they feel logical, and they give you an excuse to wait just a little longer. But what I did not understand at that time was that waiting was not helping me. It was slowly holding me back, and the more I waited, the harder it became to start. Every day, I made the same promise to myself. I said that tomorrow I would speak, tomorrow I would try, tomorrow I would not be afraid. But when tomorrow came, I repeated the same pattern again. I opened my books, I read a few pages, I learned a few new words, and I told myself that I was improving, but deep inside, I knew something was missing. I was learning, but I was not using. I was collecting words, but I was not creating sentences. I was preparing to speak, but I was never actually speaking. And slowly, without realizing it, days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and months started to feel like years. There were moments that still stay in my memory very clearly, moments that showed me the truth, even though I tried to ignore it. One day someone asked me a very simple question in English. It was not a difficult question. It was something I could easily answer in my own language, and I even understood the question completely. The answer was already in my mind, clear and ready, but when I tried to say it in English, everything stopped. My thoughts became heavy, my voice disappeared, and I just stood there, silent, while the moment passed. I smiled a little, tried to hide my discomfort, and someone else answered instead. That moment ended quickly, but the feeling stayed with me for a long time. This was not just one moment. It happened again and again. Simple questions, simple conversations, simple chances to speak, and each time I chose silence over struggle. I thought I was protecting myself from embarrassment, but in reality, I was building a habit of fear. The more I stayed silent, the more speaking felt difficult, and the more difficult it felt, the more I wanted to wait. It became a cycle, a quiet and invisible cycle that kept repeating every day. I told myself that I would speak when I was ready, but the truth was, I was never giving myself a chance to become ready. At some point, I started to notice something that made me uncomfortable. I realized that I was not afraid of English, I was afraid of speaking. English was just a language, but speaking meant showing myself, making mistakes, and being seen by others. And because I was afraid of that, I chose to hide behind learning. I focused on grammar, on rules, on understanding, because those things felt safe. There was no risk in reading quietly, there was no judgment in learning alone, but there was also no real progress in speaking. The biggest truth that slowly became clear to me was simple, but it was also painful to accept. Waiting does not make you better, it makes you more afraid. Every day you wait, your fear grows a little stronger, and your confidence becomes a little weaker. Waiting feels like preparation, but it is actually hesitation. It feels like progress, but it is often just comfort. And comfort, when it comes to learning a language, can become your biggest obstacle. I started to look at my journey honestly, without excuses, and I saw something I had never seen before. I had been learning English for a long time, but I was still at the same place when it came to speaking. I knew more words than before, I understood more sentences than before, but my ability to speak had not changed. That realization was not easy, but it was necessary, because it forced me to ask a new question. If waiting is not helping me, then what should I do instead? That question became the first real turning point in my journey. It was not a big moment, it was not dramatic, but it was honest. I began to wonder if I had been wrong all this time. Maybe I did not need to wait. Maybe I did not need to feel ready. Maybe I did not need perfect grammar or a big vocabulary before I started speaking. Maybe I just needed to start, even if it felt uncomfortable, even if it sounded wrong, even if it was not perfect. This idea felt strange at first, almost uncomfortable, because it went against everything I believed before. I had always thought that speaking should come after learning, that confidence should come before action, but now I was starting to see a different possibility. What if action comes first, and confidence comes later? What if speaking is not the result of learning, but the process of learning itself? The more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense. Children do not wait until they know everything before they speak. They start with small, broken sentences, they make mistakes, they repeat words, and slowly, through practice, they improve. They do not wait for perfection, they learn by doing. And maybe, just maybe, I needed to do the same. This thought stayed with me, and it began to grow stronger each day. I was no longer comfortable with waiting, because I had finally seen what waiting was doing to me. It was not protecting me, it was limiting me. It was not helping me grow, it was keeping me stuck. And for the first time, I started to feel a small but powerful desire to break this cycle, to do something different, to try even if it felt difficult. I did not know exactly how I would start, and I did not have a perfect plan, but I had a new belief, and that belief was enough to move me forward. Maybe I do not need to be perfect to start speaking. Maybe I can start with what I have, with the words I know, with the confidence I can build step by step. And then a new question appeared in my mind, a question that felt both scary and exciting at the same time. What if speaking badly is actually the fastest way to improve? In Chapter 3. The first small step. I remember the first step. There was a moment, very simple and very quiet, when I finally stopped waiting and decided to do something different. And it did not look big from the outside, it did not feel powerful at first, but inside me, it felt like I was crossing a line that I had been standing behind for a very long time. I remember sitting alone in my room, not with a big plan, not with perfect preparation, but with a small decision that I could not ignore anymore. I told myself that I would say just one sentence in English, nothing more, nothing complicated, just one simple sentence. It sounded easy, but when I actually tried to do it, it felt strange, almost uncomfortable, as if my mind and my voice were not used to working together in this new way. For a few seconds I just sat there, thinking, hesitating, and even smiling a little at how difficult something so small could feel. Then I finally said it, slowly and quietly, I am learning English. It was not perfect, my pronunciation was not strong, my confidence was not there, but I said it, and in that moment, something changed inside me. It was not a big change, it was not a dramatic transformation, but it was real. For the first time, I was not just thinking about English, I was using it. I was not just learning silently, I was speaking, even if it was only one sentence. At first it felt a little funny. I was alone, talking to myself, and part of me thought this was strange, maybe even useless. But another part of me felt something new, something light, something free. There was no one to judge me, no one to correct me, no pressure to be perfect. It was just me and my voice, and for the first time, I allowed myself to speak without fear. That feeling stayed with me, and it made me want to try again. So I said another sentence, I am trying. Then another one, I can do this. Each sentence was simple, but each one felt like a small step forward, a small victory that I had never allowed myself to experience before. I want you to imagine this moment with me, because this is where everything begins, not with big words, not with perfect grammar, but with one small action. It is not easy to start, especially when you have spent so much time being silent, but it is possible. You do not need to wait for the perfect time, because that time may never come. You do not need to know everything, because you can learn while you speak. All you need is one small step, one simple sentence, one moment of courage where you choose to try instead of waiting. As I continued this small practice, something interesting started to happen. The discomfort that I felt at the beginning slowly started to fade, and in its place, I began to feel a little more comfortable, a little more confident. It was not a big change, but it was enough to keep me going. I started to speak more often, still alone, still simple, but more regularly. I would say what I was doing, what I was thinking, what I was planning. I am sitting, I am studying, I am drinking water. These sentences were not impressive, but they were real, and they were mine. There was a strong emotional shift happening inside me, even though it was quiet and slow. I was moving from fear to courage, from silence to sound, from thinking to doing. Before this moment, English was something outside of me, something I watched, something I tried to understand, but now it was becoming part of my life, part of my daily actions. I was not waiting anymore, I was participating, even in a small way, and that small way was enough to change my direction. Of course, it was not perfect. Sometimes I forgot words, sometimes I made mistakes, sometimes I felt unsure about what I was saying, but for the first time, those things did not stop me. I understood something very important in this stage. Perfection is not the beginning, it is the result of practice. If I keep waiting to be perfect, I will never start. But if I start, even imperfectly, I will slowly improve. That idea gave me a new kind of confidence. Not the confidence of knowing everything, but the confidence of trying anyway. There were days when it still felt difficult, when my old habits tried to pull me back into silence. But now I had something I did not have before. I had proof. Proof that I could speak, even in a small way. Proof that starting was possible. And once you have that proof, it becomes easier to continue, because you are no longer guessing, you are experiencing. I also realized that this small step was not just about English, it was about changing the way I saw myself. Before, I saw myself as someone who could not speak, someone who needed more time, more knowledge, more confidence. But now, I was starting to see myself differently, as someone who was trying, someone who was learning, someone who was speaking, even if it was simple. That change in identity was powerful, because the way you see yourself shapes the way you act. This small step did not look important from the outside, and if someone had seen me talking to myself, they might not have understood what was happening. But inside me, it felt like the beginning of something new. It was the moment when I stopped being only a learner and started becoming a speaker. Not a perfect speaker, not a confident speaker yet, but a real one. And that is what matters most. Not perfection, not speed, not big words, but reality. Speaking, even in a small way, is real. It creates movement, it builds habit, it opens the door to progress. And once that door is open, even a little, everything can start to change. I did not know it at that time, But this one small step, this simple decision to speak one sentence, was starting something much bigger than I expected. It was not just a moment, it was the beginning of a journey that would slowly change the way I think, the way I speak, and the way I see myself. And what surprised me the most was this small step, this quiet beginning, was about to create a change I never imagined before. Chapter 4: Speaking Alone. After that first small step, I knew I could not go back to my old way of learning, because something inside me had already changed, and even though my sentences were simple, and my confidence was still growing, I had discovered something very powerful. I did not need a classroom, I did not need a partner, and I did not need to wait for someone to give me permission to speak. I could start right where I was, with what I had, and that realization slowly led me to one of the most important habits in my journey: speaking alone. At first, the idea sounded unusual, even a little strange, because we are often told that language is for communication with others. And that is true, but what I did not understand before was that communication with yourself is also a powerful way to learn. So I started very simply, in my own space, without any pressure, without any audience, just me and my thoughts. I looked around my room and began to describe what I saw. This is my table. This is my chair. I have a book. I am sitting. The sentences were small, but they were alive. And for the first time, English was not something I was studying. It was something I was using in real life. Every day, I gave myself a few minutes to speak like this. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening, sometimes while walking around my room. I would talk about my day, even if it was very simple. I woke up early today. I feel tired. I want to study. I am thinking about my future. These sentences were not perfect, and sometimes I repeated the same words again and again. But something important was happening. I was building a connection between my thoughts and English, and that connection became stronger each day. What made this method so powerful for me was the freedom it gave me. There was no fear of judgment, no one to correct me, no pressure to sound perfect. I could speak slowly, I could make mistakes, I could stop and think, and then try again. This freedom allowed me to practice without fear, and when fear is removed, learning becomes much easier. I was no longer worried about how I sounded. I was focused on expressing myself, even in a small way. And that shift in focus changed everything. In the beginning, I still felt a little uncomfortable. There were moments when I thought, this is strange. Why am I talking to myself? Is this really helping me? But instead of stopping, I continued, because I remembered something important. Every new habit feels strange at first, but that does not mean it is wrong. It simply means it is new. So I kept going, day after day, sentence after sentence, and slowly, that strange feeling started to disappear. Then something interesting began to happen, something I did not expect. Speaking alone started to feel natural. It became part of my routine, like brushing my teeth or drinking water. I did not need to force myself anymore. I just started speaking without thinking too much about it. I would look at something and describe it automatically. I would think about my plans and say them in English without even realizing that I was doing it. The effort that I felt at the beginning slowly turned into ease. This was a powerful moment in my journey because it showed me that practice creates comfort. At first, everything feels difficult, but with repetition, it becomes easier, and with time, it becomes natural. I was no longer waiting for confidence to come before speaking. I was building confidence by speaking, and that difference changed the way I learned. Another surprising change started to appear in my mind. I noticed that sometimes, when I was not even trying to practice, small English sentences would come into my thoughts. I would be doing something simple, like walking or eating, and suddenly I would think in English. I am hungry. This is good. I need to finish this. These thoughts came quietly, without effort, and they made me realize something very important. My brain was starting to accept English as a natural way of thinking. Before this, I always translated from my own language into English, and that process was slow and heavy, but now, something was changing. The translation was becoming less, and direct thinking was becoming more. It was not perfect, and it did not happen all the time, but it was enough to show me that I was moving in the right direction. I want you to understand this clearly, because this can change your journey too. You do not need anyone to start speaking English. You do not need to wait for a partner, a teacher, or a perfect situation. You already have everything you need: your voice, your thoughts, and your daily life. You can describe what you see, what you do, what you feel. You can talk to yourself, and through that, you can build your confidence step by step. This method is simple, but it is powerful, because it removes the biggest obstacle: fear. When you speak alone, you give yourself permission to try, to fail, and to improve without pressure. And when you practice like this every day, even for a few minutes, you start to see changes that feel small at first, but grow bigger with time. Looking back, I can see that this habit was one of the strongest parts of my journey. It did not require anything special, it did not cost anything, and it did not depend on anyone else. It was just a simple decision to speak, every day, in my own way. And that decision slowly changed the way I used English, the way I felt about it, and the way I saw myself as a learner. But what surprised me the most was not just that I started speaking more, it was what started happening inside my mind. Because as I continued this simple practice, something deeper began to change, something I had never experienced before, and it made me realize that this journey was not only about speaking, it was about thinking in a completely new way. Chapter 5. The Turning Point. There was a moment in my journey that did not look special from the outside. No celebration, no big achievement, no one clapping for me, but inside me, it felt like something had quietly shifted, something had moved into place after a long time of confusion and effort. I remember it very clearly, even though it was a simple moment, because it showed me that all the small things I had been doing were starting to work together. I was sitting alone, doing something normal, nothing related to studying, and suddenly I noticed a thought in my mind, but this time, it was not in my own language, it was in English. I did not try to translate it, I did not stop to think about grammar, it just came naturally, like it belonged there. At first, I almost ignored it, because it felt so normal, but then I realized what had just happened, and I paused for a second. This was different. Before this, every sentence in English felt heavy, like I had to build it step by step, word by word, always checking if it was correct, always worrying if it made sense. But now, something had changed. The sentence came quickly, easily, without pressure. It was not perfect, but it was real, and more importantly, it was automatic. That moment may sound small, but for me it felt like a breakthrough, because it showed me that my brain was starting to accept English in a new way. A few days later, something similar happened again. But this time it was even more surprising. I was speaking to myself, as I had been doing every day, and I said a full sentence without stopping, without thinking too much, without searching for words. It just came out. I noticed it immediately, because usually I would pause, think, and then speak, but this time there was no pause. It felt smooth, almost natural, and that feeling stayed with me. I did not feel like I was forcing the sentence, it felt like the sentence was coming from me. This was the turning point, not because everything became perfect, but because something inside me became easier. I was still making mistakes, I was still learning, but now I had moments where English felt light instead of heavy. And once you experience that feeling, even for a short time, it changes the way you see your progress. You stop thinking that fluency is something far away, and you start realizing that it is already beginning, slowly, quietly, step by step. I want you to understand this deeply, because this moment is not special only to me, it is waiting for you too. It does not come suddenly, and it does not come from one big action. It comes from many small actions repeated again and again. It comes from speaking simple sentences every day, even when you feel unsure. It comes from talking to yourself, even when it feels strange. It comes from trying, failing, repeating, and continuing without stopping. This is what creates change, not magic, not shortcuts, but consistency. When I looked back at my journey, I could see clearly what had caused this shift. It was not one day, it was not one lesson, it was the result of everything I had been doing daily. Those simple sentences that I thought were too basic, they were building something inside me. Those moments of speaking alone, they were training my mind to think differently. That repetition, even when it felt boring, was creating familiarity, and familiarity was turning into comfort. There was no pressure in this process, and that was one of the most important parts. I was not trying to impress anyone. I was not trying to be perfect. I was just practicing. And because there was no pressure, my mind was free to learn. When you remove pressure, you remove fear, and when you remove fear, you create space for growth. That is what I experienced, and that is what made this turning point possible. The most beautiful part of this moment was not just the progress, it was the feeling that came with it. I felt proud, not because I had achieved something big, but because I had stayed consistent. I had not given up when it felt slow, I had not stopped when it felt uncomfortable, and now I could see the result of that patience. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, but it was real, and that made it powerful. I also began to understand something that changed my mindset completely. Fluency is not a big jump, it is not something that happens in one day, and it is not something that suddenly appears. It is built slowly, through many small steps that may feel unimportant in the moment, but become meaningful over time. Each sentence you speak, each word you repeat, each moment you try, it all adds up, even if you do not see it immediately. This realization gave me a new kind of confidence, not the confidence of being perfect, but the confidence of knowing that I was on the right path. I did not need to rush, I did not need to compare myself to others, I just needed to continue, because now I had experienced what progress feels like, and that feeling was enough to keep me going. If you are still at the beginning of your journey, if you still feel stuck or unsure, I want you to remember this. The turning point is not something you wait for, it is something you create. It comes from your daily actions, from your willingness to try, from your decision to continue even when it feels slow. And when it comes, it may be quiet, it may be simple, but it will change everything inside you. Because in that moment, you will realize something that is both simple and powerful. You will realize that fluency is not far away, it is already growing inside you, one small step at a time. Chapter 6: Mistakes Made Me Better. For a long time, mistakes were the biggest fear in my English journey, and I did everything I could to avoid them, because in my mind, mistakes meant failure, they meant embarrassment, and they meant that I was not good enough. I believed that if I spoke and made a mistake, people would judge me, they would notice my weakness, and I would feel uncomfortable. So instead of taking that risk, I chose to stay silent, because silence felt safe, even though deep inside, I knew it was not helping me grow. But when I started speaking every day, especially when I began talking to myself. I could not avoid mistakes anymore. They came naturally, and they came often. I used wrong grammar, I said words in the wrong way, I forgot vocabulary, and sometimes my sentences were broken and incomplete. At first, this felt uncomfortable, because it showed me clearly how much I still needed to learn, and it was easy to feel discouraged in those moments. I remember saying a sentence and then stopping, thinking, was that correct? Did that sound right? Should I try again? And sometimes I would repeat the same sentence in different ways, trying to fix it. But something important started to change in the way I saw these mistakes. Instead of stopping when I made one, I continued speaking. Instead of feeling bad about it, I tried to understand it. Slowly, I began to see that mistakes were not blocking me, they were guiding me. Every mistake was showing me something new, something I needed to improve, something I had not fully understood before. And when you look at mistakes in this way, they stop being something negative and they start becoming something useful. For example, there were many times when I used the wrong tense without realizing it. I would say something like, I go yesterday, and later I would notice that it should be, I went yesterday. At first, this felt like a problem, but then I started to see it differently. That mistake showed me exactly what I needed to learn. It gave me a clear direction. It was not just a wrong sentence, it was a lesson. And the more I noticed these patterns, the more I improved, not by avoiding mistakes, but by learning from them. The same thing happened with pronunciation. Sometimes I would say a word in a way that did not sound right, and even though I was alone, I could feel that something was off. Instead of ignoring it, I repeated the word, listened carefully, and tried again. Not perfectly, but better than before. Each small correction was progress, and over time, those small improvements started to build confidence. One of the most important realizations in this stage was this: you do not need perfect sentences to communicate. I started to see that even with broken English, even with mistakes, I could still express my thoughts. I could still say what I wanted to say. Maybe it was not smooth, maybe it was not perfect, but it was understandable. And that changed everything for me, because it showed me that communication is more important than perfection. I remember one moment when I said a sentence that was not grammatically correct, but it still made sense. I did not stop, I did not correct myself immediately, I just continued speaking, and I realized that I was communicating. That moment gave me a new kind of freedom, because I was no longer trying to be perfect, I was trying to be understood. And when your focus shifts from perfection to communication, speaking becomes much easier. This is where a powerful mindset shift happens, and it is something I want you to understand deeply. Mistakes are not failure, they are progress. Every mistake you make is proof that you are trying, and every time you try, you are learning something new. If you avoid mistakes, you also avoid learning, and that keeps you in the same place. But if you accept mistakes, if you allow yourself to make them and learn from them, you start moving forward, step by step. The more I practiced with this mindset, the more confident I became. Not because I stopped making mistakes, but because I stopped fearing them. I gave myself permission to speak freely, even if it was not perfect, and that freedom allowed me to practice more, and more practice led to more improvement. It became a simple cycle: speak, make a mistake, learn, try again, and improve. I also noticed something interesting. When I stopped fearing mistakes, I started speaking more. And when I spoke more, I improved faster. It was not because I became suddenly talented, it was because I was giving myself more chances to learn. Every sentence I spoke, even if it was imperfect, was a step forward. And those steps, when repeated every day, created real progress. If you are afraid of making mistakes, I want you to think about this. The only people who do not make mistakes are the ones who do not try, and if you do not try, you cannot improve. So mistakes are not something to avoid, they are something to use. They are part of the process, and without them, there is no progress. Looking back, I can say that mistakes were one of my greatest teachers. They showed me what I did not know, they helped me understand what I needed to improve, and they pushed me to keep going. Without them, I would still be waiting, still be silent, still be afraid. But because I accepted them, I was able to grow. So if you take one thing from this chapter, let it be this. Do not fear mistakes. Do not run away from them. Use them, learn from them, grow with them, because the day you stop fearing mistakes is the day you start improving fast. Chapter 7. English became my life. There was a time when English was only a subject in my life. Something I opened in a book, something I studied for a short time, and then closed again. But now something had completely changed, and I did not even notice when that change became real. English was no longer something outside of me. It had quietly become part of my daily life, part of my thoughts, part of my routine, and even part of my emotions. I was no longer trying to learn English, I was living it. And that difference felt powerful in a way I cannot fully explain. Because it was not forced, it was natural. I started noticing this change in small moments. I would wake up in the morning and think about my day, but instead of using my own language, I would find myself thinking in English, without trying. I would say in my mind, I need to wake up early today. I have work to do. I feel a little tired, but I will try my best. These thoughts came softly, without pressure, and they felt normal. It was not something I planned. It was something that happened because of all the small practice I had done before. When I walked outside, I started describing things around me, without even thinking about it. The sky looks clear today. The weather is nice. There are many people on the street. I see a shop. I see a car. I hear someone talking. These were simple sentences, but they made my environment feel like a classroom, and my daily life became my teacher. I did not need to sit with a book all the time, because learning was happening everywhere, in every moment, in every small observation. I also noticed that speaking in English was no longer something I had to force myself to do. It became part of my routine, just like any other habit. While walking, I would talk to myself. While doing simple tasks, I would describe what I was doing. I am cooking. I am cleaning. I am thinking about tomorrow. I am feeling happy today. These sentences may sound small, but they were building something big inside me. They were creating a connection between my life and the language, and that connection made everything easier. One of the most beautiful parts of this transformation was emotional. Before this, English felt like a task, something I had to do, something that required effort and focus. But now, it started to feel like a part of me. I could express my feelings in English, even if the words were simple. I feel excited. I feel nervous. I feel proud. I feel calm. These were not just sentences, they were emotions. And when you can express your emotions in a language, that language becomes alive for you. There were also moments when I realized how far I had come, even though I had not noticed the progress day by day. I would understand something quickly, without translating. I would speak a sentence naturally, without thinking too much. I would react in English in my mind, before even realizing it. These moments were small, but they showed me something important. Change had already happened. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly and consistently. I want you to imagine this for yourself, because this is not just my story. This can be your story too. Imagine waking up and thinking in English without effort. Imagine walking outside and describing your world in English naturally. Imagine speaking without fear, even if your sentences are simple. This is not something only a few people can do. This is something anyone can build, step by step, day by day. The key is not talent. It is not a special ability. It is not something you are born with. It is the result of small daily actions, repeated over time, speaking a little every day, thinking a little every day, using the language in your real life, instead of keeping it only in books. That is what creates this transformation. It does not happen in one day, and it does not happen without effort, but it does happen if you stay consistent. Looking back, I can see that the biggest change was not in my English, it was in my mindset. I stopped seeing English as something difficult, something separate, something I needed to master, and I started seeing it as something simple, something useful, something I could use every day. That shift made everything lighter, and when something feels lighter, you do it more often, and when you do it more often, you improve without even realizing it. There were still challenges, of course. I was not perfect, and I am still not perfect. There were moments when I struggled, moments when I forgot words, moments when I felt unsure, but those moments no longer stopped me. They became part of the process, not obstacles. I understood that progress is not about removing all difficulties, it is about continuing despite them. And the most powerful part of this journey was this realization. If this happened to me, it can happen to anyone. I was not special. I did not have any advantage. I did not follow a complicated method. I just started small. I stayed consistent, and I used English in my daily life. That is all. And that is enough. So if you are still at the beginning, if you are still feeling unsure, I want you to remember this moment. English can become part of your life too. Not in a difficult way, not in a stressful way, but in a natural and simple way. It starts with one sentence, then another, and slowly, those sentences become your thoughts, your habits, and your voice. Because when English becomes part of your life, it is no longer something you learn, it is something you live. And if I could reach this point step by step, with simple actions and daily practice, then there is no reason you cannot do the same. Chapter 8. Your story starts now. When I look back at my journey, from the days of silence to the moments of confidence, I do not see a perfect path, I do not see fast success, and I do not see anything special that only I could do. What I see is something very simple and very real. I see a person who was afraid, who stayed quiet, who waited for the right time, and who slowly realized that waiting was the only thing holding him back. I see small steps, repeated again and again, even when they felt uncomfortable, even when they felt too simple to matter. And when I connect all those small steps together, I can clearly see how they created a big change over time. There was a time when I could not say a full sentence without fear, when my mind would freeze and my voice would disappear. And today, I can speak every day. I can express my thoughts. I can think in English, and I can live with the language in a natural way. This transformation did not happen in one moment. It happened slowly, quietly, step by step. And the most important part is this: if it happened for me, it can happen for you too. Now I want you to stop for a moment and think about your own journey. Not the future, not what you hope to become, but where you are right now. Maybe you feel shy. Maybe you feel confused. Maybe you understand English but cannot speak. Maybe you are still waiting for the right time, the right confidence, the right moment to begin. And if that is true, then I want to tell you something honestly. You do not need to wait anymore. You already have everything you need to start. You do not need perfect grammar. You do not need a big vocabulary. You do not need confidence. Before you begin, all you need is one small decision. The decision to speak. Not tomorrow, not next week, but today, right now. Even if it is just one sentence. Even if it feels strange. Even if it is not perfect. Because that one sentence is not just a sentence, it is the beginning of your journey. Imagine yourself, after a few days of doing this. You speak a little every day, you think a little in English, you describe your world in simple sentences. At first it feels new, but slowly it starts to feel familiar. Then imagine a few weeks later, you notice that you can speak more easily, you can understand faster, and your mind starts to create sentences without too much effort. Then imagine a few months later, English is no longer something you struggle with, it becomes something you use. You are not perfect, but you are confident. You are not afraid, but you are active. You are not silent anymore, you are speaking. This future is not far away, and it is not impossible. It is built from small daily actions, the same actions I took, the same actions you can take. Speak a little, think a little, repeat a little, and do it every day. That is all. There is no secret method, there is no shortcut, there is only consistency. And consistency, even in small amounts, is more powerful than anything else. I know that starting can feel difficult, because your mind will tell you to wait. It will tell you that you are not ready. It will tell you that you need more time. But you have to understand something very important. That voice will always be there. If you listen to it, you will keep waiting, and if you keep waiting, nothing will change. The only way to break that cycle is to act, even when you do not feel ready. Because action creates confidence, not the other way around. So right now, wherever you are, I want you to do something simple. Say one sentence in English. It can be anything. I am learning English. I feel excited. I want to improve. It does not matter what you say. What matters is that you say it. Because in that moment, you are not just thinking about learning, you are doing it. And that is the difference between staying the same and moving forward. I want you to feel proud of that small step, because it is not small in reality. It is the beginning of a new habit, a new mindset, and a new version of yourself. A version that does not wait, a version that tries, a version that speaks even when it feels uncomfortable. And that version of you is the one that will grow, the one that will improve, and the one that will eventually become confident. As you continue this journey, remember everything you have seen in this story. The silence, the waiting, the fear, the first step, the daily practice, the mistakes, the transformation. All of it started from one simple action, and that same action is available to you right now. You do not need to be different, you do not need to be special, you just need to start. Because at the end of the day, your story is not different from mine. You have the same fear, the same doubts, the same challenges, but you also have the same ability to change, the same chance to grow, and the same opportunity to begin. The only difference is one simple thing. I started, and now it is your turn. And now I want to ask you something honestly. Are you still going to wait, or are you going to start today? Because everything you saw in this video is not just my story, it can become your story too, but only if you take that first step. So right now, say one sentence in English, and write it in the comments, I will read it. And if you want to keep improving step by step, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel, because your journey does not start tomorrow, it starts now.